we'll go ahead and get started. Clarissa, can you hear me okay? Just so I can test to make sure it's good. Sweet. So we'll go ahead and get started, and if people come in, we'll just have them come in. But I'll let you know this is being recorded, so we will have this on our website that we'll have at the end of the PowerPoint slide on our website, the URL link to it. And then we'll have the PowerPoint available there as well. But welcome, I'm Shannon Osborne. I work in the Student Support and Advocacy Center on the Financial Wellbeing team, and I'm the Assistant Director for Financial Wellbeing. So it's a relatively new position here at Mason, but we're trying to create these financial literacy programs here for all of Mason community and students, staff, alumni, faculty, or friends and family of Mason, those kind of things. In addition to it too, this one's on credit and budget. This is our second episode of the Money Talk series. We're doing them roughly once a month, give or take various things that we have. The first one was on student loan repayment, and we'll talk about the one that's coming up for the third episode as well. So I'll be the presenter, and then the moderator is Clarissa. So Clarissa, if you just want to briefly introduce yourself for a little bit.
Hi everyone, my name is Clarissa Meza, and I am the Graduate Assistant for Financial Wellbeing here at SSAC. And we're glad to see you, and thank you for joining.
Okay, so if, like Clarissa said earlier, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. She will read the questions off to me, and I'll just go ahead and get started here. So I'm going to share my screen. Hold on. I'll also say, bear with us. We're still kind of learning how all of this presentation works on Zoom. So if there's any technical errors, I do apologize. We're still working through all of that. Like I said, this is the second episode of the Money Talk series on creating a budget and managing credit. And I'm Shannon, and she's Clarissa. Okay, so the first thing we're going to start with is basic financial literacy language and a vocab list. So I start with this one because I think oftentimes when you deal with things like financial well-being or financial literacy, a lot of times different words can be said and we don't truly understand what those words necessarily mean. So the first one is a borrower. So who is a borrower? What is a borrower? A borrower is a person who is physically borrowing money, typically a loan that is then repaid later at a different time. Next is budget. It is also known as a spending plan. It outlines the money you expect to earn or receive, basically your income. It then helps track your spending and saving expenses for a given period of time. Next is cosigner. It's an individual who signs a loan or a credit account of another person as support for the credit of the primary signer. The cosigner becomes responsible for the debt obligation if the primary signer does not pay, which I know is a lot to say right there, but basically the cosigner is somebody who is responsible for paying the debt if the person who's the primary signer cannot pay the debt. So at least you are also tied to it. Now, sometimes when it comes to different loans or different things like that, you could have a cosigner release that could later release you as the cosigner for the responsibility of that. Next is direct costs. So direct costs are expenses that are directly related to your education. So things like tuition and fees that you have to pay for being a Mason student, those would be direct costs. Or if you live on campus, those are billed through student accounts, so that's considered direct costs. Indirect costs, those are expenses that are indirectly related to your education, but are expenses that you have in general from being a student. So books aren't billed directly to your student account, but you need to have them in order to be successful in your classes. So books are considered indirect costs. Room and board if you live off campus, personal transportation, all those kind of things. Next are out-of-pocket expenses. These are expenses that are not included in the covering to include deductibles and copays that are not covered. So example, you might have to pay out of pocket for a certain amount for health, medical reasons, or different things like that. Next is the financial well-being, which is basically something that we kind of created, the definition of it, because there's no real good definition out there of what financial well-being is. Everybody kind of differentiates on what that is. But we came up with creating a sense of security and feeling centered around having a financial balance in your life. It's the feeling of having the financial freedom to plan for today, tomorrow, and the future. Oops, hold on. Okay. Next is loan. It's the money that needs to be repaid by the borrower. It usually has interest. Next is grace period. It's a repayment that begins 6 months after you graduate or you fall below halftime. Next is servicer. So that's a middle organization that if you go to borrow something, then you would have to repay possibly through the servicer. Next is lender. Lender. It's an organization or person who lends money to a borrower. An interest, it's a fee that is in addition to the loan amount that you might have borrowed. An interest rate, a lender charges a percentage of the sum borrowed for lending the money. And fixed interest rate, the first one was variable, so the next one's fixed interest rate. The next will be variable. I mean, fixed interest rate does not change during a fixed period of time, and variable interest that might change or decrease over time. So you might hear throughout this presentation or anytime that we talk during these Money Talk series about financial well-being, some of these terms, so it's kind of good to have a good overview. So we're going to get started right away into budgeting and really creating a budget, the importance of why we even create a budget and how we kind of go about that. So the first is, why should I have a budget? Why is it even important to have a budget? There are different fundamentals that are rules around budgeting. It helps track your spending, spend less than you earn, pay yourself first, and prepare for the future, monitor your financial health. But we're really going to get into what is a budget. So a budget is also known as a spending plan. It outlines the money you expect to earn or receive, which is your income, and it helps you track your spending and saving expenses for a certain given amount of time. It then is easier to manage your money. It makes it easier to reach your financial goals. So whether that is in 5 years, I want to buy a house, or in 5 years, I want to pay off my car. Having a budget is coming up with those goals to then create that plan to get to where you want to be. It's a skill that will help you manage your money, not only in the present, but also planning for the future. Most importantly, it helps you avoid unnecessary debt. So if you don't have a budget, but then you have these medical expenses that come at the end of the month, how are you going to pay out of pocket for those medical expenses if you weren't planning and saving throughout the time? You might have to use a credit card or take on debt to help pay for those expenses that you didn't plan for through your budget. What are the different types of expenses that we should consider when we create our budget? So an expense is anything that you would spend money on. So that could be anything that are fixed expenses. So fixed expenses is a set amount that you pay every month and it doesn't change throughout anything. So expenses would be like rent, for example, or a mortgage. You know how much money that's going to be every month because you have a lease or you have a mortgage contract and you know that's how much it's going to be every month. Next would be like a cell phone plan. So you know what plan you picked, you know how much it's going to be every month. Car payment, same thing. Any subscriptions that you might have to various things or any medications, those are typically fixed throughout every time. Clarissa, let me check real fast. Can you see the chat okay? Is there any questions that I maybe missed on previous ones? You're on mute, I think.
Sorry, there are no questions. I just want to let the attendees know. If you have any questions, please feel free to type it into the chat box and we are happy to answer them.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, next is variable expenses. So variable expenses could change from month to month. So these expenses would be like groceries. So, you know, we would say, for example, pre-COVID, when everything started, maybe groceries you spent $300, $400 a month. But then when COVID happened, maybe you spent $600 to $700 a month because now you're not eating out as much and you're buying more groceries. So those could definitely change from month to month, especially depending upon the prices at the grocery store. Utilities, those could change from month to month depending upon how much you use and how much you don't use. For example, in the summer, maybe your electric bill is a little bit higher because you're using air conditioning, where maybe in the winter, your gas bill is a little bit higher because you're using your furnace to help kind of heat the house a little bit more. So those can kind of vary from month to month. Credit card payments could also vary from month to month depending upon how much you spend on the credit card and the interest that accrues that you have to spend back as well too to repay that credit card debt. Next is periodic expenses. So those are expenses that do not accrue monthly, but are rather expenses that you have every once in a while or a few times a year. Tuition and fees is a good example. Those are billed by semester, so they're not every month. Arguably, yes, they could be every month if you're on a payment plan, but in general, those are due at the beginning of the semester. That would be like gifts. So you might spend more in December because you're buying Christmas gifts for friends and family versus the other months. Travel. So again, around the holidays, you might be traveling more. So that might be a periodic expense. Taxes, we know those are due in April typically, but that kind of depends. They're not going to be the same amount you have every month that you have to pay, even though that pays monthly out of your monthly paycheck that you might have. Still, when you have to go to finalize your taxes at the end of the year. DMV title and registration, that's only once a year or twice a year, depending upon how you want to set it up. And insurance premiums that can kind of vary from 6 months to 12 years. You can pay monthly on them, but they may adjust and you might just pay it once for that 6 months or 12-year time period. So it's really important when you're creating your budget to know the difference between these three. There's the fixed that is locked in, the variable that kind of changes, and the periodic that comes and goes and differentiates. So when you create your budget, you might have a different section for the fixed expenses and a different section for the variable and the periodic, etc. So budget plans kind of vary. There could be all sorts of different ones and how percentage-wise you want to set it up. But one that both Clarissa and myself liked was this 40-30-20 rule. So the idea is that 50% of your budget is what we call needs expenses. So rent, utilities, groceries, car payments, those are, no matter what happens in society, I definitely need those in order to function and live. I need to have those. 30% would be of your wants. So that would be eating out, entertainment, shopping, traveling. Those are different wants that I want. And 20% would be savings or debt repayment. So that's important too, because you definitely want to save, and I encourage everyone to do that, but you also want to be able to pay down some of your debts as well. So if you have credit card debt, for example, that's accruing every month and you have high interest, but you're not paying more towards your credit card debt, you're only paying $2,000, we'll just say, to your savings every year, but you're not paying more to your credit card debt, you're just accruing all that interest. So you might swap it around a little bit to pay $1,500 to savings and pay $500 towards your credit card debt to help pay down some of those debts. This can definitely change. You could have 60%, you could have 30%, 10%, however you want to do it. This is just kind of a good rule of thumb when it comes to creating your budget plan. Next is, how do I keep track of my budget? So this is a great example of what we would call a monthly budget sheet. Now, you're going to hear me talk a lot about how you could use this, you could use something else. The biggest thing I tell people when they ask me, hey, Shannon, how do I create a budget sheet? And I say, well, what works best for you? The reason that I say that is really just because there's so many different ways to create a budget. And I could hand you a piece of paper and say, okay, Clarissa, today create your budget based upon this. Well, you might do it for a month or two, but then because I gave it to you and you didn't create it yourself, you don't feel that investment into this is how I like to organize things. Some people like to do things where they just have a budget sheet and they do it the old fashioned way where they use their paper and pen and write it out. Some people like to use an Excel spreadsheet where they type in how much they spent and then it kind of does the math deduction and formula for them. Some people like to use their apps on their phones, and there's different companies that do that as well. The biggest thing I tell people is just use something that works for you, because then you're more likely to use it. But no matter what you use, a budget would definitely have to be something broken down into this. So I like this one, for example, because it breaks it down into categories. So you have housing, rent, taxes, insurance, any repairs that you might have to budget for throughout the year. This would be typically if you own a house, you might have to put repairs into your budget. Utilities would be like electric, gas, sewer, trash, internet, phone. Those are how much you basically would want to budget. And then you see on the right column, that's how much you spent. So you would do it at the beginning of the month. And then at the end of the month or throughout the month, you would track how much is spent. And then you can reevaluate next month to say, I spent too much in this category. Maybe I should increase the budget here and then decrease how much I spend over here, that kind of thing. Next is food. So like groceries, restaurants, and then charity donations if you wanted to do that as well, and car transportation expenses, personal, medical, and then there's also any debts that you might have, like credit card debt, different things like that. So you can then tally up the total balances, your monthly goal, and then what your end balance is. So like I said before, you can do a general Google search and just type in, into Google, budget monthly worksheet. You can even go to Google Images, find a bunch of different worksheets to print out yourself if you wanted to. You can use the one on this PowerPoint slide. You can use an Excel template. I know they have budget sheets, even a template through Excel. You can create your own on a paper and pen. Some websites that both Clarissa and I liked was mint.com. I've used it before on my phone. It's an app that you input your data into and you can adjust your budget based upon there. What I like is that's really good for what I would call visual learners, right? So it's going to have different categories and it's going to be similar to the graph with the 50, 30, 20 rule that we showed, where it's going to show you how to adjust your expenses depending upon how much you spent that month. So you might have one category for dining out be really high, and you can even set up notifications to tell you that you're kind of high when you're coming to that expenses. Nerdwallet.com is also a different good one. Your bank would even be good to talk to as well. A lot of banks have different budget sheets that you can use to help balance your checking and savings account and making sure you're really sticking to that budget. Things to consider when you're creating the budget, when you're kind of planning everything. Spending costs put into perspective. So this is really important to think about. So one new shirt, let's say that costs $25 to buy this new shirt. Well, if I buy a new shirt every month, that's going to be $50 a month. And then times a year, that means I spent $600 on my wardrobe for my closet on new shirts. Another example that's maybe, really relevant, especially to students, would be Chipotle. I'm just going to spend $8 here eating at Chipotle. That's no big deal, right? I'm just going to take this lunch. I'll spend $8 eating at Chipotle. Well, then, Friday, I did that on Monday, but then Friday came around and I forgot my lunch at home. So I have to eat at Chipotle again. So that's $16 this week. But then I get in that habit when I'm doing it every week. So before you know it, you spent $832 at the end of the year at Chipotle eating out versus bringing your lunch and saving money that way. Uber or Lyft taking rides, let's say that's only, $10 once a week. Well, if you do that every year, that's $520 just on rides you've done to and from. So could you have biked or take the bus or different ways like that to help reduce those costs? Next is knowing what are your needs versus your wants when you create a budget. So breaking down everything into what we call categories, we would then have to think about, is this truly a need or a want? So let's look at cell phones first. I know today, was it today or yesterday? I think it was yesterday. They came out with the newest iPhone. So maybe you need to have a cell phone because it's important for you to have a cell phone in order to communicate with people. However, do you need to have the latest iPhone that they just advertise is coming out? Or is that something that you want because you're just really interested in technology and you want to have the newest and greatest? Or could you go with an older version iPhone to save a little bit of money because you need to have a phone, but you can also not have to want the newest version? Clothes, yes, we definitely need clothes in order to function as a society. However, do we need to have the most expensive type of line of clothing, or is that more of a want and we can kind of shop around for good deals? Netflix, right now you could say that's definitely needed during a pandemic, totally understandable, but is that more of a want? Some people even want to not have cable TV, so they sign up for Netflix too. So you just have to do the budget. Is it cheaper if I do it that way? Rent, I would say that's definitely a need, but something like living with roommates and splitting the cost that way could help reduce things. Internet, right now, obviously that's probably a need, but do you need to have the most high-speed internet, or is there a different version you can have that makes it more of a less of a expensive amount? Haircuts, for example, vacations. So that's definitely a want, you could say, but that could be a need. That could be mental health and wellness and balance to help focus on you, which then helps you focus on doing well in school. And gym memberships, food, music, books, and magazines. So you just basically, like I said, have to figure out which is a need and which is a want. And one could say it's both, but then how do you adjust it to make it more of a need and less of a want, maybe reduction in things? When it comes to any debts to your income and the ratio and creating a budget, if you're having trouble balancing your budget, you have to look at, am I getting more money in? And if you're not getting more money in, you then have to look at your budget to say, what do I need to cut in my budget to make it so that I can meet my goals at the end of the month and meet my budget? Next is money saving alternatives. So if you need to cut those expenses so that you meet your goal at the end of the month, what are different ways you could cut that money? The first would be taking the bus or carpooling or walking or biking to and from campus. Next would be any free campus events. So, doing all these virtual events that we have to do right now, there's lots of them on the Mason campus. So there's all sorts of events you can do. If you are on campus, there's even some in-person campus events right now as well. You can also volunteer at events. That's one of the most creative ways to save. Did you know that there's some events like a concert or a performance or something like that that you could volunteer to be one of those people that helps others find their way to their seat, which also means you could attend that event for free? I used to work with a coworker at a previous institution that I worked at, where she would volunteer at one of the places downtown and help at different concerts. Sorry. And it was always so fun because she'd come to work the next day talking about this concert she went to the previous night. You would have thought it was crazy because she goes to concerts every weekend, but she never spent any money on them because she just volunteered to help work there and got to attend as well. You can also make your own coffee. I know this is really difficult, especially when you wake up late and you want to go to Starbucks on your way, but every time you go to Starbucks, that's another, expense you have there versus if you go and you make your own coffee first. Also use student discounts. You as a Mason student have the ability to use discounts on things like a cell phone plan or different things like that to help cut the cost. Identify where your income is really coming from. So, is it a paycheck that you get every month? Are mom and dad sending you any funds? Is it babysitting? Is it dog walking? Where's that money coming from to kind of add up? Track where you're spending your money, and then create that budget and monitor your spending every month. And then, like I said, reconsider what your wants and your needs are. And the biggest thing you always hear from people is live within your means or live within your income. But what does that mean? That means doing your budget every month to understand what your means are, what your income is, and sticking to that budget and holding yourself accountable. Maybe you overspent this month, but then next month you're going to adjust and underspend to help save and make up for what you did the previous month. Does anybody have any questions on the first section, the one about budget that we did? I'll kind of wait a minute to see if anybody wants to type in any questions for there.
I don't see any questions.
Okay, oops. So I'll go ahead and get started. So credit can be super confusing, especially because all that when it comes to credit is just, it's a number. But what does that number really mean? Like, for example, did you know that a credit score is out of 850? But what makes up that credit number and where does that really stand? This graphic I really like because it kind of shows you roughly where that number is and what it means. So, 750 to 850 would be excellent credit, where 700 to 740 is good credit, and 650 to 699 is fair, and then so on and so forth. What makes excellent credit? What makes bad credit? And where do we even begin when it comes to credit? So let's start with what is credit. So credit allows you to charge purchases, write checks, or make cash withdrawals of amounts up to a certain limit. Important things to know when it comes to credit. There's a principal, which is the amount that's borrowed, and there's interest, which is the amount charged expressed as a percentage of the principal for the use of assets. So it could be interest that accrues every month. So for example, if you have a credit card, then you're swiping and spending that money on the credit card for $10 of a shirt you bought. But if you don't pay that off by the end of the month, you're going to get, I don't know, $1 something of interest accrued. So now that shirt cost $11.50, we'll say, instead. So that interest is a little bit that comes out afterwards. So what are the advantages of credit? So with credit, you can buy now and pay later. So if I have a credit card, I can buy that shirt right now that I really want and then pay for it, like I said, at the end of the month. So maybe I don't have the cash right here, so I can definitely go ahead and buy it, but then I can pay for it later. Next is you can make purchases online. So that's actually a really great advantage. It's really secure. So you don't want to be entering in your debit card information online. And let's say that system gets hacked or anything like that could happen. Then all of a sudden your debit card that's tied to your checking account information is taken, which could access that cash that you have. So using a credit card to make purchases online is the most secure way. especially because it's happened to me and I'm sure it's happened to you, or you call up your credit card company and you say, I didn't make that purchase, they can just cancel it, work on doing an investigation to find out about it. Or a lot of times, if it's your debit card, then your cash is held up until they can resolve it. Where credit, it's not really changing your cash or anything like that. So it's very more secure. You don't have to carry large amounts of cash around. So let's say that, you're walking on the street and you're not comfortable carrying that much cash. Well, a card is a lot better, because if your card gets stolen, you can just call up the credit card company and they'll just stop the card right then and there. If your cash gets stolen, you've lost it. There's no way to get it back necessarily without going through filing a police report. And then it's unknown if you'll even get it back at that point. You can establish good credit. So it's always, when I meet with students, I always say, we live in a world that in order to have credit, to have good credit, you have to have credit. So you have to start accruing credit in order to have good credit history, to then have less interest on something later on. So establishing that credit now could help build the credit history that you want as good credit for the future. It can be safer than a debit card. Like we said, if in case you get hacked or anything like that, then you're not going to have your money be stolen. So what are the disadvantages to credit? So you spend more than if you use cash. So that's really important. So let's say that you have a credit card. Well, because you don't physically have that money and it's not counting towards your budget that month because you didn't kind of plan for it, it's really easy for you to just swipe and pay for something here and swipe and pay for something here. And then all of a sudden, this $15 swipe didn't seem so bad, but then you get that bill at the end of the month and you go, how did I spend $450 on my credit card this month? Well, that's because it was very easy for you to swipe $15 here, $10 here, $5 here, and so on and so forth. Next is items purchased may cost more if you do not pay off the balance each month. So for example, if I spent $450 of that month on everything, well, I look at my budget, I don't have $450 to spend on this credit card bill. I can only spend $150 to pay off that credit card bill. So I'll put $150 to it. Well, that leaves $300 unpaid of interest that will accrue the next month. Okay, and then I added $150. I added we'll say $200 more of spending to that. So now my credit card is $500. You see, it's a snowball effect. So if you don't pay it off, the next month comes and all of a sudden you have all this credit card debt you didn't think you would have originally. Next, debt hinders you from savings and investing. Like I said, in order to save and invest, you want to make sure you're also paying off your debt too. So if you've paid off your debt and you don't have it, then you have more than you can save and invest. And investing is really important too, because it helps your money grow at a very rapid pace over amount of time. You can establish poor credit history. So the poor credit history comes from not paying every month. So let's say you don't even make the minimum payment on your credit card. You miss it for a couple months. That can start really hurting your credit history over time. So next we talk about why do we care? Who reports to who, and how does this whole credit process work? So I want to first start talking about your FICO score. So you've heard of a FICO score before. That's the amount that's depending upon that 850, and it kind of ranges depending upon your credit history. Well, that reports to who the lender is, and the lender is the person you're trying to borrow the credit from, which then reports to the credit reporting agency that then reports back to FICO. So it's a full-on circle to kind of figure out, who can lend to you and how much they can lend to you. So what counts in your FICO score? Because that's really what's really important. Like we said, the top was 850, but what really makes up that number? So, a lot of times people don't realize this, but on-time payments actually only make up 35% of your FICO score. People think it often makes up almost 100% of the FICO score, but paying on time is definitely really important, but that's only 35%. Next is capacity used. So have you ever heard of people say you only want to use 60% of the credit that you have? Well, that means that's the rule of thumb. So if you have a credit card that is $1,000 limit, you want to make sure that you're only spending up to $600 at a time on that credit card, and you're not exceeding that. Because anything over 60 is kind of that rule of thumb that it's going to adjust your credit score a little bit. Now, that doesn't mean that some people think that means that I have to leave $600 there at all times and I can never pay it off. Go ahead and pay off your credit card if you can. It's not going to hurt anything. You could then use it the next month to have $100 on it and pay that off. The 60% rule just means if you have to have debt on your credit card, just don't let it exceed 60% if you can prevent it from that point. So that's the capacity part. So between on-time payments and capacity, you're looking at 65% together of the total there. The next is the length of history. So if you are 18 years old and you're just starting college, you're not going to have a really long credit history behind you simply because you haven't been around long enough to really establish credit history. However, your parents at age 60 years old might have a longer length of history and a better credit score because of that. So there are different ways to kind of get associated with length of history. I'm not saying that you have to go ahead and do this, but if a parent, let's say, for example, put you on their credit card because they wanted you to be at school and buy books and they wanted to be able to pay off the books on their credit card, that would actually increase your length of history because anything that they have for length of history will resonate with you as well too. I'm not saying go out and spend all this money on your parents' credit card, but these are just various examples to increase your length of history.
Shannon, we have one question.
Mm-hmm.
For the FICO score and capacity used, are there any negative effects for not using 60% of your capacity? I try to keep my use below 10% monthly. Will I incur any penalties?
No, good question. So you don't get any penalties for anything less. And that's where I was saying that a lot of people think that 60% rule means that you have to keep it at 60% of your credit card debt every month on there. What I'm saying is you don't have to. You can pay it off completely. You just don't want to spend more than 60%. So if your mentality is, I only want to be 10%, then that's totally fine. That's the important part. You actually get points on your credit score for just physically using your credit card. So even though you only spent, let's say $10 buying a Starbucks coffee or two this month, then you'll get some points on your credit score. You just don't get points if you don't use your credit card at all. But if you're using it that month and paying it off before the end of the month, that's the important part too. Is there another question or we good? Okay.
Yeah, good.
Okay.
Right.
So next would be new credit. So sometimes, and that's a smaller percent, but 10%, establishing in credit and taking out more credit can be good. Meaning you don't want to do too much of this. So if you keep applying for a car and you keep hearing no from this one, no from this one, no from this one, that's going to do some bad adjustments to your credit number and it's going to reduce it a little bit. However, if it's been 15 years and you haven't established a new credit line, that's going to kind of adjust things a little bit too, because really what that credit score is looking at is, can you make on-time payments and are you reliable and trustworthy? So, if it's been 15, 20, 30 years since you even had any new credit in your name, you could take out a small credit card just to kind of establish some of it and then not do one again for another 10 to 15 years. So I'm not saying that you have to have new credit every year, but just kind of being relevant and establishing new credit every once in a while is important to kind of adjust the score. But again, that's only 10% or arguably a little bit less than 10%. So it's not as important as some of the other ones. Next is 10% is the type of credit you have. So the amount that you have and the type too. So for example, student loans might have more of a hit to the credit score because of the fact that they don't know what that monthly payment will be, or the mortgage because it's going to be really high, where maybe because you had a small credit card of $500, that doesn't have as much of a hit because that's a small line of credit that you have there as well too. But all of these kind of together roughly make up the 100% of where everything stands. So the biggest thing is making sure you pay everything on time, and then using the capacity around that not going over that 60% capacity as well. Those two things alone would be the biggest ones. Okay. Next, we're going to do a kind of a fun little interactive polling question when it comes to credit. This is new for Clarissa and I to use these polling questions, so we're pretty excited to do this, but bear with us because we kind of navigate this technology and you all are guinea pigs for the first time. So we're going to start here with the first question. So placing utilities in your name is a good way to build credit. So Clarissa is going to put up that poll question. You'll have about 30 seconds. All of these questions I'll say are true, false. So go ahead and, if you can on your computer, just put if you think it's true or false. And I'll read the question again. Placing utilities in your name is a good way to build credit. kind of let those questions come in here. I think if we have them all, we can probably end it soon, right? Okay, so it looks like about 86% said yes, true, and 14% said false. I think if I close this. So the answer is actually false. So most utility companies actually do not report to your payment information to a credit reporting agency. However, that's actually a really trick question, because I always tell people when it comes to paying your electric bill, when it comes to paying your gas bill, it never increases your credit score. It can only decrease your credit score. So if you pay on time every month, good job. You're paying on time every month for your electric or your gas bill. That's great. However, you're not increasing your credit score because of that, because those are expected expenses. They're not credit lines. But if you miss your payment on your electric or gas bill, they will report that to your credit agency. So they're not always reporting it. It's only if you do bad and you miss payments that that's getting reported. But unfortunately, just paying your electric bill every month is not establishing any credit. It's not building your credit. Are there any questions, Clarissa?
Yes, we have one question. What if medical bills go to collections? How does this affect your FICO score?
That will. So anything that does go to collections will affect your FICO score. That's why I say try to avoid collections at all possible costs. The thing is, I understand it. I've been through it myself. My husband's been through it too. I know it's really hard when you have a bill due and you cannot make a payment, so it's easier to kind of ignore it. But the best thing is really calling them and saying, here's my financial situation. I'm not able to pay this bill. Is there a payment plan that I can do? Trying anything to prevent that collections, because once it hits collections, it's really hard to build your credit back up again. However, I will also say that once you are officially in collections, collections is negotiable. So once you officially hit collections, don't feel like there's nothing I can do. I can't pay this $1,000. It's in collections. I can't do it. You can call them up and negotiate a payment plan, and they may say to you, okay, if you pay $800 today, I'll wipe this collection debt out, and then you pay the 800 and then you can kind of move on. But the damage is done. It's going to take a couple of years to rebuild it. However, just know that they will work with you even on repayments at that point too.
Someone else says, but many banks and mortgage companies look at utility payment records.
They do. They only look at if you missed payments. They only look at that in that case. We're talking about the credit score though. So the credit score doesn't increase if you pay on time. But other people, like a utility company, might look to see if the previous utility company you paid on time or not. But that's not necessarily looking at your credit score per se.
I think medical bills you can't negotiate once they are in collections.
Some of them you can. It really depends. If you're a student and you have medical bills and collections, you should be able to call them and say, I'm a student and here's my situation, and they'll be able to work with you on different things. No, nothing that's in collections will ever say to you, you owe us all this 20 grand right here, no matter what. They will work with you on the repayment because it's better for them to get some money than no money at all. If they don't get any money from you, then they're not progressing where they need to go type thing. So it's always really important to at least pick up the phone and call them and try to work on that to say, how do we fix it? Where do we go from here? Okay, next question. Oops. So the next one says, missing one payment will not impact your credit score. So you want to get that question up. So missing one payment will not impact your credit score. You should be able to put true or false. All right. I think we have them all in here. Okay, so it looks like most of you said false, and we have about 83% there and 17% said true. So missing one payment will not impact your credit score. False. Even one late payment might impact your credit score. When it comes to your credit score, there'll be different sections that will say this percent is 30 days past due, this percent is 90 days past due, this percent is 120, and so on and so forth. So it's really important to make sure that you're paying on time every month. If you can't pay on time every month, like I said, that's fine. Go ahead and give them a call. A lot of people don't know that if you let's say December comes around and you just cannot make this credit card payment at all. If you call your credit card company up before the payment's due, let's say a week before, they might postpone your payment for 2 more weeks or just give you some more time. Yes, interest is still accruing. However, at the same time, you don't then have to feel like you have to make that payment, and then there's no way you can't make that payment and be dinged for it on your credit report. I think a lot of times people just think it's easier if I just don't pay it all, where I'm saying it's easier if you call them and give them a heads up ahead of time. Now, that doesn't mean every month start establishing that habit where every month you're telling your credit card company you can't pay, but it's just saying the credit card company is understanding that some things happen and that you might have to postpone payment for a month just to help get established for a different situation. Okay, next question. Oops. Okay, using your debit card wisely will help you establish good credit. So using your, oops, I think we typed that in wrong. Sorry. The right way is using your debit card wisely will help you establish good credit. So that's actually going to mess up the question a little bit here. But ignore the question that's in the poll. Just look at the question in the PowerPoint. So using your debit card wisely will help you establish good credit. And I'll explain in a second why that's a confusing, how our mistype between debit and credit is kind of a funny confusion one there. Okay. Oops. Okay, so false. Okay, sorry. So a debit card withdraws money from your checking account. And does not impact your credit, even though the card might have an MC or a Visa logo on it. So the reason that I said that was kind of funny is that using your credit card wisely will help establish good credit because that's a credit card that has credit on it. However, using your debit card is not credit line. That is only just hooked up to your checking account, and some of them can be prepaid cards as well too. So that's only using the money you have and the cash you have on hand, where credit is using credit that you don't have cash on hand for, which is increasing your credit score. So that's why I said it was funny that we had that mistype on the poll question, because the answer would have been true on the poll question when it's false on the PowerPoint slide. So you want to make sure that you're using a credit card to establish good credit, not a debit card to establish good credit. Oh, yeah.
If you are a student who's never had a credit card before but want to give it a try, what agencies would you recommend going through? I mean, like banks.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I would say if you're a student, you don't have to have a credit card to start establishing your credit. You could for sure. However, if you have student loans, that's actually establishing your credit already. That's going to adjust your credit number depending upon how much loan debt you have from being a student. But once you go into repayment after school, your credit score is going to start going up once you're making those on-time payments. So if you have student loans, you've already established that credit. However, you can do a credit card too. The biggest thing I say if you're looking at trying to get a credit card to establish credit is you want to shop around a little bit. Let's say let's keep that max score limit to like $500, so you don't overspend. You can only spend $500 a month. That's the max limit it can. Then you can say, I want to use this credit card company. For example, let's say that you use an Amazon credit card, because every time you do Amazon purchases, you're getting cash back. So you want to make sure you're using one where you're actually getting something in return. There's some credit companies out there that you're not getting any cash back or any points for using it. So you're not getting anything from it. If you use it for Amazon, you're getting those points back. You can save up those points, and then when you have next semester and you have to buy books, you can use that with the points that you've saved because you paid it off every month and you have points that you've accrued and collected. So definitely shop around, but you want to use a credit card that has any points. It could be airline miles, cash back, anything like that you can use. The other thing like I said, when it comes to using a credit card, if you want to be safe, is only use it for certain things. So like I said, it's really easy to swipe here or swipe there or swipe there, but you could say, I'm only going to use my credit card on my gas, right? Because I know that my traveling, sorry, to and from campus only costs me X amount in gas every month. So every time I use my credit card, I'm only going to use it on gas. And that way, at the end of the month, I'm paying off my gas for that month, and I'm establishing credit because I'm kind of rolling it through. So you don't have to use the credit card on everything. You could just pick one specific thing to use it for to establish that credit. Any other questions? Okay. So next is all credit cards are created equal. I think I kind of already answered this a little bit, but we'll see. So put up that polling question to see if what you think. So all credit cards are created equal. All right, you guys all put false down. So let's see here. So correct, so false. So you learned something from the previous one. So false. So you want to make sure that you check the fine print in the terms and rates of the credit card. Like I said, you want to make sure that you're using one that you're not necessarily not getting anything back in return, or this one has a 29% interest rate, or this one has a 32. So you know which one is better, that kind of thing. Oops. So next is a credit card comes with a credit limit. So credit card comes with a credit limit. Okay, so it seems like almost all of them are in, and we have 100% with the true. So let's go back here. Okay, true. So credit limits are determined largely by your FICO score. So I kind of talked about it before, but you might have a credit card that has a $500 limit on it. What does a limit mean? It means you just can't physically spend more than $500 on that credit card. It wouldn't let you. That doesn't mean that you want to leave $500 on there every month. Like I said, you definitely don't want to leave less than 60%, and you want to be able to pay it off every month if you can. However, that could change depending upon what your income is, we'll say. So sometimes over time, your credit company might have you, when you log in to your bill online to pay, it might say, has your income changed? And you could say, yeah, actually last year I got promoted and I'm getting about 10,000 more. So then you would put in your new AGI, or adjusted gross income, and that could increase your credit limit. Increasing your credit limit could be good. Let's say that you buy a new house and you want to buy furniture to furnish that house, but you don't have the money right now. You can use your credit card to maybe purchase the furniture and then use a monthly payment plan to pay it off over time, type thing. So it definitely will increase your credit limit. Having more credit limit is also good when you go to buy a house, because it will show you've paid it off and you have this much free available credit to you right now that you don't have to run your credit or credit check for. Okay, so next is people spend money. Thank you. People spend money more when they use credit. So people spend more money when they use credit. Sorry, my dog's stirring a little bit, so hopefully she doesn't start barking, but just letting you know. I always tell people that's what we get for working from home in 2020, but anyways. Okay, so it looks like most of them are in, and the answer is true, so correct. Okay. So like we talked about before a little bit, true. Research shows that it indicates that credit users make larger purchases with credit than they would with cash. So if you have your cash in the wallet, you're seeing that cash go down more and more as you spend money. So then you're like, maybe I really shouldn't buy this right now because I want to make sure I have some cash in my wallet. Where a credit card, it's really easy just to swipe and swipe and swipe. And then at the end of the month, that's when you really get hit with how much you have to pay. So this is a good question too. So your car insurance rate is tied to your FICO score. Is that true or is that false? So your car insurance rate is tied to your FICO score. Okay, it looks like we have an even split here of true and false. Okay. It's actually true. Insurance companies consider a low FICO score to indicate poor driving. So they actually do look at your credit score when they determine what your car insurance rate is. So when you call a car insurance company up, that's why they ask what your social security number is, and they'll tell you over the phone they're going to run your credit, because they want to see what that credit score is to determine, are you a liable risk for car insurance? So if you have low credit, that means you don't make payments on time. So does that mean you maybe drive poorly too because of that, which means you're more of a liability for them, so they're going to charge you more on car insurance. So for example, Clarissa and I together might go look at Geico for credit car insurance, we will get different rates, even though we have maybe similar car history. Let's say we both have like a 2004 Honda or something. We might have different rates because maybe my credit score is lower than hers. So it kind of just depends various times around there. So that's why it's good. If your credit score starts going up, you can call your car insurance company to reevaluate the rate or go to a new company. You could get a lower rate for your car insurance if you have a higher credit score. Okay, so that kind of concludes our polling questions. Hopefully you guys liked that a little bit. That was a fun little kind of interaction, and thank you guys for putting up with us as we kind of navigated everything there. Clarissa, is there any questions?
Yes. How can students determine their school debt limit while they are attending college? Should students consider their future income, major, career choice when deciding how much they should borrow and their ability to pay? Other advice so that students don't end up paying on loans for their lifetime.
That's a really good question. And it's hard, right? Because it depends. So, let's say it depends on too what you want to go into. So let's say that your passion and dream is that you want to go into social work, but you know that they will maybe never make more than 50,000 a year. So getting your master's in social work, knowing you might not pay more than 50,000 a year, but borrowing $200,000 in student loan debt to go to a private out of state school, maybe not is the best idea because you won't be able to repay it. However, if you're getting your undergrad degree and a bachelor's and you're borrowing, let's say, just the subsidized loan, and maybe you're establishing credit that way and have 14,000 of debt, that's probably something you can manage too. So usually when I talk to people about student loans, I more talk to them about financial fit. So what is your goal? Do you want to have X job? Do you need X amount of degrees to get to that point? Do you have to have a master's to get to that point? Do you have to have a bachelor's to get to that point? Where does that stand when it comes to the financial fit overall? Because you're right, you definitely need to pay back your student loan debt, but you want to make sure you're not putting yourself so far into student loan debt that you can't repay it afterwards. I will also say that our session that we did in August that we're going to get up on our website was on student loan repayment. And I talked about how there's roughly about 7 different repayment plan options. So they're not all just based upon this is how much you pay per month and then you pay it off of 10 years. It can fluctuate depending upon your income. It's what we call income driven repayment plans. So it could be low if you don't make that much money, and it would adjust and go higher eventually if you do make money. There are also other forgiveness options out there, like public service loan forgiveness, teacher loan forgiveness options as well too. So it's definitely good to check out. That one, I also talked about how if you go to studentloans.gov, they have a repayment calculator there. So if you're somebody who's saying, I don't know if I should take on this much student loan debt because I can't repay it, you can play around with the student loan repayment calculators there. Type in how much you think you're going to make after you graduate to see if that's something you can repay. If you're not sure how much you would be making, let's say that you're a teacher K through 12, you can go to Google and type in what's the average salary of a teacher in Virginia K through 12, and you can get a good rough average to then put in studentloans.gov to kind of see if it's worth taking on that much debt. So really the biggest thing I talk about people is it a good financial fit for you? Do you need XYZ degrees to get to the goal dream job that you want? If you don't know what you want to do and you don't know what your career is, you want to maybe take some time to really navigate what that is before you take on all this debt before you can't repay it type thing. Okay, good. Okay, so we'll move on. I'm kind of running out of time, so I'm going to wrap this up a little bit here. So what are the next steps? So review your credit load, set realistic goals for paying off any credit cards you have. Look at how long it will take to pay off that credit card. I put Cash Course up here. So cashcourse.org is a great interactive website tool where you can do a bunch of financial literacy sessions through them. You can sign up for an account and you can take some of these credit and budget sessions there as well to help kind of teach you all those different things. You can set up a savings account and consider paying with cash or going without. You can also request a free copy of your credit report. Did you know that you can go to all of these credit reporting agencies, Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, to look at what your FICO score is? They will adjust a little bit depending upon those agencies. So it's good once a year to check with them to see where your credit score is so that you can adjust accordingly. So I did want to save a couple minutes for any questions that we have. It looks like it's about 1:57, so we have about 3 minutes for questions that you guys might have, but you asked some good questions on the way too. I did put up here, this is the link to our website, our financial well-being website, and we do have an email address as well too at fwb@gmu.edu. If you ever want to meet with us, we can do that virtually. We can set up those appointments. We can talk about any credit questions you have, budget questions, student loan repayment questions you might have, understanding student loan options. So I did want to talk about our next episode 3 is going to be November 18th. We will send out information about how to sign up for that later, but that's going to be on understanding financial aid options and the impact of COVID on financial aid. So definitely tune in for that one. There's going to be a lot of information about aid for the spring semester and aid for next year as well.
Shannon, we have a few questions.
Yeah.
There's a comment that says, also there are forgiveness loan program for people in the federal government. Does requesting your credit score reduce your credit? And what is the maximum of credit? Can people really get a maximum?
So requesting your credit report is free one time a year from those agencies, so it won't adjust your credit score. You can pay for it again if you need it more than one time in the year, but it really wouldn't impact your credit score. The only time requesting your credit history will impact your credit score is if you go to borrow credit, then it's going to run it a little bit, which could adjust your credit score. But I'm not talking about a lot of points. So if you go to purchase a vehicle, they're going to run your credit report to check your credit history, which will reduce your credit score by probably like 5, 10, 15 points. But then in the next month or two, when you make those on-time payments, you're going to earn that back up again. So I wouldn't really worry about, that kind of adjusting here and there. And then what was the next question?
Yes. What is the maximum of credit? Can people really get a maximum? And how do you manage your budget? Spreadsheet or some apps or through an app?
Yeah, so the maximum for the credit really depends on you as the individual where your credit score is. So if you're just establishing credit for the first time, that 500 maximum I told you about might not be unrealistic where it is. Where, for example, my dad, who has maybe had more credit history than me, might have a credit maximum on a credit card of like 10,000. You're never going to see a credit maximum of 1 million. It would never be that high. However, it might be like 10,000, but that doesn't mean he has 10,000 credit card debt on that one credit card. That just means he can't spend more than that at any given time or have that much credit on that credit card. So the maximum really just depends on the individual, and it can fluctuate and increase if your credit score starts improving and if you make more money over time. Clarissa, what was the next part of that question?
How do you manage your budget? Is it through a spreadsheet or do you use some type of app?
So similar to what I said before, I say whatever works for you because you have a different budget preference than I do necessarily. For me, I like Excel spreadsheets because I'm just a financial person and I like math and I like spreadsheets, and Clarissa can attest to how much I love spreadsheets. But some people like to use the app on their phone because it makes it easier for them, or some people just like the paper and pen copy. So really what I say is I could say this Excel version works well for me, but that doesn't mean it works well for you. So you really need to play around with the different ones to see what really works best for you. So you could use one version this month, and then you maybe adjust and figure out which one you really like the best. Is that all the questions?
Those are all the questions.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, hope you guys really like this and tune in for the next Money Talk series on November 18th on understanding financial aid options and the impact of COVID. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.